In what way is it expensive to be poor? I saw a lady coming out of a laundromat, loading her baskets of clothes into a taxi. There is zero other public transport where I saw this happen and only a few taxis. Not being able to put enough money together at one time to buy a car or a washing machine. She probably rented, so this maybe wasn't even an option. Was costing her a fortune. Just being nickeled and dimed to death. I've seriously walked my laundry basket over a mile to the bus stop on a regular basis. Not fun times. Laundromats are expensive as hell too. There are late fees for everything. Overdraft fees at the bank. Shitty jobs usually don't have good healthcare plans. If you're poor, you need credit cards just to survive. But interest rates are higher for those with low credit scores. See late fees above. Shitty cars are always breaking down, and that's expensive. The poor pay interest, and the rich collect it. My car has a leaky seal on the transmission. It'd be about $250 to replace the seal and flush the transmission. I don't have $250, so I keep topping up the fluid and keep driving it because I'll never get $250 if I don't get to work. But, in time, that's going to destroy the transmission, which will be about $1,200 to replace. When bank fees are waived if you keep more than $X amount in your account, but they start charging for the account when the amount drops under the minimum. Being stuck with higher interest rates because you don't have enough credit to get low rates. Also, having to pay interest at all. If you're able to pay for a college education or a house with money you have in the bank, that's much cheaper than having to take out a loan you have to pay back with interest. You can seldom buy in bulk, so you end up paying more for things. For example, our local butchery sells ground beef cheap if you buy 2 kilograms or more at a time. If you're paid weekly and can afford only 500 grams per week, you end up paying more. Mental health, or more specifically stress. You will always have stress about future. Always making decisions based on your poverty so that it won't affect your situation in bad way. If you're ever desperate enough to take out a title payday loan, you'll discover you just stepped in financial quicksand. About a year and a half ago I forgot to leave enough money in my bank account for a payment that needed to be done. It wasn't much, around $500 maybe, but didn't want the late payment and fees that come with it, so I decided to look into the payday loans. I needed $500 to last until Friday, when I would be paid. I checked on it on Monday. When I was to click accept, I read the entire thing. It said I had to pay back $950 if I paid on Friday, or about $2,500 if I went with their payment plan. I noped out of that bullshit as fast as I could. Called my bank and I luckily had overdraft protection or whatever. Payment went through and all I had to pay was like $15 or something for the overdraft. The justice system. If you can't pay a fine, the state will make things more expensive by adding fees on top of fees on top of fees. Then they will incarcerate you for not paying the inflated fees. Then you have to pay the parole officer who is keeping an eye on you while you care, unable to get a job that pays enough to pay him. Harpersville, Alabama had a federal investigation launched on them for this just a few years ago. They are one of the poorest cities in America and their cops would pull people over and accuse them of drunk driving and arrest them regardless of whether they were drunk or not. They would then get thrown into jail and charged daily for being in jail. Then when they finally got bailed out or had a court date, they would have fines put on them for the penalty as a special plea bargain so that you don't have the DUI on your record. And then they would get charged interest on the fines, and if they went to delinquent they would get arrested again and have extra fines put on top of it. I'm remembering this as best as I can, but apparently their Justice Department's revenue was so high that it triggered an investigation by the FBI because it was well above all of the surrounding cities and counties, and they got so good at bilking their poor and impoverished residents that the rest of the government wanted to know what they were doing that was so financially successful, only to find out that they were basically thugs using the law as a weapon. If I remember correctly, the mayor of the town and the chief of police went to jail for it. A filling is cheaper than a root canal. The quality of stuff you're able to buy. For example, someone struggling for cash will buy a pair of shoes for £5 that last for a short period of time and need to be replaced every 2 months. And someone who is more well off can afford to buy a pair of shoes for £40 which last about 2 years. Therefore at the end of the 2-year period the poorer person has spent around £120. Renting to own anything is really bad. You pay 4x the value of whatever it is you're renting to own. And if you miss a payment they repossess it and someone else might start at the beginning of attempting to pay for it again. Not only that, you very well might be paying 4x the new value for a used item. And only low quality items are sold rent to own. Ashley Furniture, Shtai Used Cars, the cheapest big screen TVs available at wholesale. Houses might be better, but Rent-A-Center and JD by Ridder are worse than loan sharks. Biggest one that I always think of for all my fellow Americans is medical care. If you're poor you put off medical care as long as possible, and it's extremely expensive by the time it's serious enough to address. Food deserts, where everything at the single grocery store for miles around is marked way the hell up because its shoppers usually paying food stamps and or have nowhere else to go. Laundry. Imagine needing an entire morning afternoon to load and lug your shit to hot building and feeding machines quarter after quarter after quarter while being tethered to the spot so your stuff won't get stolen. If you're poor you already have no or very little money to invest in yourself, so you have to take on debt to do so. If you want to get technical certifications or degrees, sometimes there's financial assistance but a lot of the time taking on loans is necessary. As prices go up, and minimum wage stays consistent, it's completely expensive to be poor. We're paying all of our checks for food and rent, and we have no wiggle room. Go buy food in the hood and compare the prices to the suburbs, way more. Then when you try to shop for food in the suburbs you get followed around and harassed for being out of place. I rented a townhouse in a really nice, upscale neighborhood. At the time, I was making decent pay but apparently, it still wasn't enough for some of my neighbors. While walking to the grocery store one day, I decided to grab some food from one of the restaurants nearby. An older couple stared at me and basically suggested that they can't trust some people around the area. They even went so far as to change seats and move their dog away from me. This was before COVID. I made it a point to call my mom and speak in English so they would know that I was talking about them and mocking them without them knowing exactly what I said. Can't afford to buy bulk at Costco, so end up spending more and getting less in the long run. Everything is expensive when you're poor. Jokes aside, this is true. I've been poor for most of my life and I'm still not in a great financial situation. And the biggest problem is that you not only don't have a lot of money, but all the prices stay the same. So literally anything that you buy feels like a fortune. I walked to the grocery store to buy some stuff to make a special dinner on my daughter's birthday and I spent about $100, about $20 I think. IDK. And I swear I'd win an Oscar for how I kept my poker face. The second I walked out of the store I bursted out crying. Everyone on the street could see me crying as I walked back home. Seeing my daughter's smile later that day during dinner made me feel a lot better. But those $120 really hurt. You can't afford to buy a place and essentially throw the money away into rent instead of paying off a house and being able to sell it after. You have to buy a cheap, unreliable car that will inevitably cost you more in repairs, poor fuel economy, higher insurance, etc. In every manner, if you want healthy food, that costs, but eating cheap food, while sustaining, will inevitably lead to poorer health. Bad health will cost you. If you want to not be stressed, and stress is huge when it comes to health, then that means not having to worry is kind of an integral part of poverty. Stress means less awesome interpersonal relationships, means less sleep, means overwork to try to make ends meet. Good interpersonal relationships, getting enough sleep, and not working yourself to exhaustion are things that help you stay alive. Mentally, you now have a running total of how much everything in your life costs. I guarantee you that every poor person knows precisely how much milk costs, or gasoline, or a bus pass, or the subscription to Netflix that brings them just a little joy, and if they can afford it or not. There are no coins in their couches, $5 to discover in an old coat. They need that money and they know where it is, and if not, now they have to spend time, another expense, dealing with debt collectors, or people at utility agencies or banks or government offices, trying to negotiate and navigate systems that may or may not be willing to help them, regardless of that system's original intent. Poverty is merely the accumulation of expenses that one cannot pay, and once you are poor, there is a system in place to ensure that you never, ever run out of those expenses. I'll add that when you have less money, the power relationship is flipped in nearly every financial interaction you have. When you have money, banks and companies compete to get access to your reliable spending, be it with low interest rates on borrowing or better deals for early payment. They have to compete because you have the option to go to someone else who will gladly take your payment history and stable income. You're a safe bet, so you have the luxury of choice. When you don't have money, institutions know you have nowhere else to go, so they happily gouge you, knowing agreeing to horrendous loan terms is your only option. I teach econ and always remind my kids that commercials both sting about no credit, low credit, no problem, know exactly who they are getting in the door. People who have nowhere else to go. Being unable to pay for education is the most expensive way of staying poor, and don't come with scholarship and that stuff. It is expensive and even more if you are like me from a poor third world country. Low paying jobs can also be physically harmful, i.e. factory work, and you can be treated like garbage because it's cheaper to pay out the occasional lawsuit and medical expenses rather than resign the factory and make it less efficient to be safer.